The decision to move north often begins as a quiet calculation, but daily life in Canada unfolds as a gradual shift in rhythm rather than a dramatic reinvention. Many Americans arrive expecting colder air and familiar streets with subtle variations, yet the first weeks reveal a different emotional climate. The light feels softer in winter, the cities breathe at a slower pace, and public conversations carry a restrained tone. What initially appears similar begins to separate into delicate cultural layers. In the early days, Americans often notice the spaciousness. Even in major cities, the skyline rarely presses inward with the same urgency found in large American urban centers. Streets feel wider. Voices seem lower. Small interactions at grocery stores or transit stops unfold with an understated politeness that is less performative and more procedural. Apologies are offered almost reflexively. Eye contact lingers briefly, then retreats. The atmosphere carries a sense of shared restraint, as if social harmony holds higher priority than individual assertion. Weather quickly becomes more than background scenery. Canadian winters are not merely colder, they shape routine. Commutes are calculated around snowfall. Footwear is chosen with practicality over style. Social gatherings migrate indoors for longer stretches of the year, encouraging more intimate circles. Many Americans observe that seasonal endurance becomes a communal experience. Conversations frequently begin with commentary on temperature or road conditions, not as small talk but as recognition of a shared physical reality. Work culture presents another subtle recalibration. While ambition remains present, its expression often feels tempered. Canadians tend to frame professional success with measured language. Direct self-promotion appears less common, replaced by collaborative phrasing. Meetings may move with less overt confrontation, favoring consensus building over competitive debate. For Americans accustomed to faster verbal exchanges and assertive positioning, this shift can feel disorienting at first, then unexpectedly calming. Public services also alter daily perception. Healthcare, discussed openly and often politically in the United States, becomes a normalized background structure. The absence of routine billing conversations changes the psychological texture of medical appointments. Discussions about education, childcare, and social benefits arise with pragmatic acceptance rather than ideological intensity. Over time, these systems influence how security is experienced on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Neighborhood life reflects a quiet collectivism. Flags are present but less omnipresent. National pride surfaces during hockey games or national holidays, yet it carries a quieter confidence. Americans frequently sense that identity is expressed through understatement rather than declaration. Cultural diversity is visible in city neighborhoods, but it is framed through coexistence rather than spectacle. Gradually, habits adjust. Speech softens. Pauses lengthen. The instinct to accelerate softens under the weight of winter mornings and courteous exchanges. What once felt like efficiency begins to resemble urgency. What once felt like politeness begins to resemble distance. Between these interpretations lies the subtle transformation that accompanies relocation, not a rewriting of identity, but a recalibration of tempo, expectation, and emotional volume. As weeks turn into months, the differences that once stood out sharply begin to weave themselves into routine, shaping perception in ways that are difficult to measure yet impossible to ignore. As familiarity deepens, the structure of ordinary days continues to evolve in understated ways. Many Americans begin to notice how public space in Canada carries a different emotional temperature. Parks remain carefully maintained yet rarely crowded to excess. Public transit, though imperfect, moves with a subdued orderliness. Conversations in shared environments avoid overt conflict, and even disagreement is often cushioned in tempered language. The collective preference leans toward minimizing friction rather than amplifying individual stance. Financial rhythms shift as well. Salaries may be recalibrated against higher taxation, yet those taxes materialize visibly in infrastructure, healthcare access, and community services. Americans frequently experience a psychological adjustment. The concept of contribution replaces the emphasis on personal retention. Budgeting discussions become less about private insurance premiums and more about cost of living in colder climates. Heating bills enter the conversation. Winter tires become non-negotiable. Preparation replaces spontaneity as a seasonal discipline. Social integration follows its own timeline. Canadians often appear friendly but reserved, a distinction that becomes clearer over time. Invitations may arrive more slowly, friendships may form with deliberate pacing, and small talk tends to avoid personal intensity. Americans sometimes interpret this as distance, yet extended exposure reveals consistency beneath the reserve. Reliability often replaces exuberance. Once bonds form, they tend to carry quiet durability rather than expressive affirmation. Work-life balance presents another recalibration. While productivity remains valued, extended vacation time and parental leave policies subtly shape collective expectations. Taking allotted leave is not always perceived as weakness. Stepping away can signal normalcy rather than risk. Americans accustomed to equating constant availability with dedication may gradually reassess their internal definitions of ambition. The pace of professional ascent appears less theatrical, more procedural. Cultural expression reveals further nuance. National narratives emphasize inclusivity, multicultural coexistence, and measured diplomacy. Public discourse often favors moderation over polarization. Media tone reflects this balance, leaning toward cautious reporting rather than charged rhetoric. Many Americans observe that emotional intensity in public debate feels softened. The absence of overt ideological confrontation creates a quieter informational environment, one that can feel both reassuring and restrained. Seasonal rituals deepen the transformation. The first snowfall of winter shifts from novelty to shared endurance. Spring's arrival carries heightened appreciation, almost ceremonial in its relief. Outdoor patios reopen with collective enthusiasm, and lakeside weekends become near sacred escapes during brief summers. Climate does not simply decorate the calendar, it governs emotional cadence. Canadians often move with awareness of these cycles, planning months ahead in alignment with temperature and daylight. Gradually, internal dialogue adjusts. The instinct to assert begins to share space with the instinct to harmonize. The desire for rapid resolution gives way to tolerance for incremental process. Americans living in Canada may find that reactions soften, expectations recalibrate, and definitions of success broaden. What once felt like compromise can begin to resemble balance. Through repeated interactions, at banks, schools, workplaces, community centers, the subtle architecture of Canadian society reveals itself not as dramatic contrast but as sustained moderation. And within that moderation, daily life continues its quiet reshaping, guiding perception toward a steadier, more measured interpretation of progress and belonging. Over longer stretches of time, the transformation becomes less visible yet more profound. Many Americans who settle in Canada begin to sense that urgency slowly loosens its grip. The constant comparison of status, income, and achievement, once embedded in casual conversation, appears less dominant. Success is still pursued, yet it often unfolds without theatrical display. Houses are maintained rather than showcased. Careers advance without relentless self-advertisement. The cultural atmosphere seems to reward steadiness over spectacle. Community identity grows more layered. Canadians often express attachment to region as much as to nation. Provincial distinctions carry quiet significance, shaping accents, policies, and local customs. Americans gradually recognize that belonging does not demand loud declaration. It emerges through participation, volunteering at neighborhood events, enduring winter together, sharing seasonal rituals that mark time with collective patience. Integration becomes less about reinvention and more about alignment. The educational environment reinforces this measured ethos. Classrooms tend to emphasize collaboration and moderated discussion. Public institutions operate with an expectation of accessibility, even when bureaucratic pace tests patience. Over time, Americans often recalibrate expectations of efficiency. Processes that once seemed slow begin to feel deliberate. The trade-off between speed and stability becomes clearer in daily encounters with administrative systems. Even language subtly reshapes perception. The frequent use of courteous qualifiers, phrases that soften opinion or diffuse tension, gradually influences tone. Americans may find their own speech patterns shifting, adopting gentler framing in professional and social settings. Assertiveness does not disappear, but it is often wrapped in diplomacy. Emotional expression becomes filtered through communal awareness. Seasonal endurance leaves its imprint on worldview. Surviving extended winters cultivates resilience that is collective rather than individualistic. The shared anticipation of spring reinforces patience. Summers, though brief, are embraced with intentional joy. This cyclical intensity fosters appreciation for moderation in other aspects of life. Extremes feel less sustainable, balance feels practical. With time, comparisons to life in the United States grow quieter. The need to measure difference gives way to acceptance of dual familiarity. Americans may carry elements of their original cultural tempo, directness, entrepreneurial instinct, expressive confidence, while absorbing Canadian moderation and collective consideration. The result is not replacement but synthesis. In the end, moving to Canada does not transform daily life through spectacle. It alters atmosphere. It adjusts the volume of public discourse, the cadence of work, the boundaries of ambition, and the emotional tone of ordinary exchanges. What changes most is not identity itself, but the surrounding rhythm that shapes it. Within that rhythm, daily existence becomes less about acceleration and more about steadiness. And in that steadiness, many discover that transformation rarely announces itself loudly. It settles quietly into routine, revealing that culture is not only expressed in grand ideals, but in the measured pace of a weekday morning, in the soft exchange between strangers, and in the calm acceptance of seasons that demand patience before renewal.